welcome everybody to this special peer review week edition of Highwire's Best Practice webinar series. Today's webinar is entitled "The Future of Peer Review: Diversification and Decentralization." My name is Tony Alves. I'm Senior Vice President of Product Management here at Highwire. I will briefly introduce today's topic as well as moderate questions and discussion. But first, let's do the housekeeping. This webinar, it's being recorded. That recording will be shared after the meeting. It'll be accessible for free, so please feel free to share it with colleagues and friends. And please put your questions in the question box. And that way we will take the questions at the end during the discussion part of the call of this webinar. So please go ahead and put questions as you think of them in the question box. So this year's theme for Peer Review Week is Peer Review and the Future of Publishing. So let's start talking about the future by quickly looking at the past. Pictured here is one of the original scholarly journals, the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. It was established in 1665, and interestingly, it utilized early forms of the journal workflow and peer review that are still important today. The founding editor, Henry Oldenburg, he defined the purpose of the Philosophical Transactions as a way to establish provenance over an original idea or invention and to evaluate ideas with the intention of making those ideas better and to disseminate the information to others. So you can see that peer review has a long and established tradition. And it also shows you that, scholarship is iterative. It builds on itself. The researchers, they conduct experiments based on experiments that were conducted in the past with the hopes that the articles describing their experiments and conclusions will be cited by other researchers in the future. A research article can be seen as a conversation between scholars, and in the past, this conversation almost exclusively took place privately between colleagues, and then more recently, and officially as part of an anonymous peer review process. Today, though, technology really does allow this conversation to take place in the open, in forums like preprint servers or as part of reviewed preprint outputs, and the conversations can be ongoing with post-publication commenting. The reputation and the utility of peer review performed outside of the journal setting has improved, and there are now multiple providers of what is sometimes called community peer review, offering various services that are targeted at different parts of the scholarly communication ecosystem, from preprints to reviewed preprints to journal peer review to post-publication commenting. This Peer Review Week webinar will examine different types of community and third-party peer review services and examine how community peer review, including pre-submission and post-acceptance review, fits into the future of peer review. Attendees will learn about these different services, the roles they are playing in the scholarly evaluation process, and how they can be integrated into their own publication processes. Our panel includes representatives from Pre-Review, eLife, and PubPeer, and I'll be introducing them shortly. I do want to bring to your attention that there are several services available that perform independent peer review of preprints and are involved in the peer review process or post-publication review. A really nice comprehensive list called Reimagine Review has been compiled by ASAP Bio, a nonprofit organization that promotes evolution of the peer review process. And Reimagine Review is a registry of platforms and experiments that are innovating around peer review of scientific outputs. And I also want to share another useful resource for learning more about preprint peer review and community peer review. Last year, I served as a guest editor for the online publication Commonplace, published by Knowledge Futures. And it's a series of articles that examine editorial processes and the communities that are built around those processes. They explore diverse and innovative approaches to the editorial and peer review process. So with that, I want to now introduce the presenters. We'll start with Fiona Hutton, head of publishing at eLife. She'll explain the reviewed preprint model that eLife adopted a while ago and the benefits of this model and the reactions from the community. Second, we'll have Monica Granados from Pre-Review, who will discuss how their community of scholars are making peer review more open and equitable. And finally, we'll have Boris Barber from PubPeer. Boris will present the benefits of post-publication peer review and explain how PubPeer works. So with that, I want to hand it over to Fiona.
Okay, thank you very much. Hold on, I'll just get my slides up. Okay, hopefully can you see that?
Yes.
Brilliant. All right, well, thank you very much, Tony. So I'm going to talk about eLife's new model of scientific publishing, which we launched at the end of January this year. I'm Fiona Hutton, I'm the head of publishing at eLife. So a little bit about eLife first. It was established in 2011 as an independent non-profit to establish an open access journal, as a sort of high quality open access journal. But we have a mission to accelerate research through publishing, technology and cultural reforms. So we have these three different strands, and we're supported by a number of funders outlined here: HHMI, Wellcome, Wallenberg and Max Planck. So, there's many problems with the current system, and, our focus is on the reviewed preprint, public review and assessments of preprints. But what's wrong with the current system? We recognize that it's slow. It takes on average sort of 9 months between submission and publication of output. So that's a sort of slowing down of the time that's very valuable. Undervalues the time of academics because there's this constant shifting from one journal to the next based on certain indicators of how someone can improve their research. So their article is often cascaded down through different journals. It doesn't really give enough control to the authors, and it gives greater weight on where an article is published rather than what's published. And that, that's the problem, a deep problem in research assessment as well. And it causes so many problems within the sort of scientific process. But there's a movement for change. Lots of people are talking about open science. It's been declared the Federal Year of Open Science. A lot of those initiatives are to ensure there's adoption of open, equitable and secure science. And we think that preprints are the first step in a new process that can encompass that. So we thought about, if we were to design a better model from scratch, what would we go about trying to improve? We'd make the process faster, good for science, good for scientists, more transparent, give more control to the authors and have a better value system. So this is just a schematic of our new eLife model. Essentially, it follows a similar process to normal journals at the start. Submission, there's a decision to review, then there's peer review and consultation. For our journal, as eLife always has, it's been a consultative process. The author can respond to reviews those reviewers describe, and they also the editor with the reviewers also complete this eLife assessment, which they also publish with the articles. So a review preprint is published at that stage. So what we're trying to do is review preprints and assess preprints. After that, we're leaving it to the author to choose what to do. They can revise their article in accordance to some of the comments. They can say, look, I'm finished with this article. I want to publish it as a version of records. Or they can say, actually, I don't really like this process. I'm going to try a different journal. So a huge part of what we're doing is about author choice. So I'll just skip through this very quickly. This is what our review preprint looks like. We have the history of the article displayed. There's a link to the peer review comments, and then there's the eLife assessment, which is a really fundamental part of what we're trying to do. In the eLife assessment, we have a common assessment vocabulary, the comments on the significance of the findings and the strength of the evidence in the article. So the editor with the reviewers come to a consensus of what that should be. So what are we, all the criteria that we set ourselves out, are we achieving it with this model? We can see that our preprints are posted immediately, obviously on the preprint server, but that validation of the preprints, i.e. the peer review of the preprints, is happening much faster, within 1 to 3 months of the publication of the preprint. It's good for science. We've got detailed assessments about what the article, the value of that particular article. It's not just an accept reject decision. So the reader is getting a much more insight into what the reviewers and the editor thought of the article. And this transparency really increases the scrutiny of the research that's published. It's good for scientists because it values that time of the authors. It values the time of the reviewers. What a reviewer thinks about the article it's not, that article is then rejected and sent to another journal. Therefore, that's a complete waste of time. That review is part of the process that will be published. It's more transparent. It's all visible. The assessment criteria is visible. The peer review comments are published. The author comments are published, and the whole system is tracked, and you can link from one version to the next version, and you can link back all the way back to the preprint. And this gives more control to our authors. They choose how they will respond to the reviews. They choose which amendments that they're going to make, and they themselves decide on when they think their article is ready to publish a version of record. It's also better value because we're a not-for-profit sustainable publisher. All we're looking to do is sustain our publishing output. So we've managed to reduce the fee from $3,000 to $2,000. And of course, we give full waivers to anybody that asks for one. So our new model has, caused a lot of discussion within the community. When we originally announced our new model at the end of October last year, there was a lot of discussion on social media. Some people like it, some people don't. A lot of people were discussing it in Twitter. We had like 1 million impressions on the day of the announcement. So there was a lot of discussion in the scientific community. It's also been discussed in the news. A lot of people have written articles about it, editorials about it. People are very interested in what we're doing and why we're doing that. So what's our progress? We've nearly achieved 4,000 submissions in our new model. And we have the old model open as well as the new model, because some of our editors felt that it was important to see whether our authors wanted to submit into the new model. And what we find is about 1 in 10 submissions are going to the new model, the old model versus the new model. It is taking our editors approximately the same time to invite the paper for review. But the interesting point, which I referred to earlier, is that validation, i.e. the reviewed preprint, is being published within 79 days at the moment, whereas in our old model, it takes a lot longer than that to see the article that's been peer reviewed. So the validation of that research is happening publicly, is happening much quicker. And what's really interesting, particularly for peer review week, is that those public reviews are being engaged with. We've had some controversial articles, and for one particular paper, there was 4 times the amount of views for our public reviews versus the paper, and that was linked to from Twitter. But it was a really interesting, set of data to see that people are really interested and engaged in what our reviewers are saying about these particular articles. And what about our editors? What do they think of the new model? There's a lot of support from our senior editors. We surveyed them recently. Over 80% are very to moderately supportive. With their eLife assessment, it's very similar, over 80%, 86%, and their reviewing editors, who are, you know, our editors are really the backbone of what eLife does. So their opinion is really crucial to how we move forward and what we think of the model and how it works. So there's a great deal of support for the model, with their reviewing editors as well, and what they think of the assessment. So that's really encouraging. So thank you very much. I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you, Fiona. I was having trouble finding my unmute button. I should remember that I could just use the space bar. Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm sorry, Fiona. And now it's Monica's turn. So
thanks, Tony. I'll go ahead and grab the virtual lectern here. So thanks again for the invitation, Tony, for to be part of this webinar. My name is Monica Granados. I am on the leadership team of Pre-Review. I also work at Creative Commons, but I'm here to talk about Pre-Review's really central focus around the topic that we're talking about today, about making things more diverse and more decentralized in service of making this peer review process more equitable. The top here slide talks about, or really states the motto of Pre-Review, which is around openness and transparency of reviews, but for all researchers. And I really appreciate, Tony, your introduction to the beginning of the peer review process, because I think it really contextualizes why our separate organizations are trying to challenge what really remains a very stoic and unchanged model in peer review. Peer review is pretty flawed, and Fiona talked about some aspects that are not working for reviewers and for authors. I'll tell you a little bit about the perspective or an additional perspective of why we think that peer review is flawed. Really, it results in a pool of reviewers that's small, and as probably anyone who works in scholarly communication knows, that the number of reviewers is insufficient for the number of papers that are being submitted to journals for review. And even within that existing pool of reviewers, the reviewer pool is pretty homogeneous and in many dimensions, not just career stage or gender. What it turns out then is, when you look at this reviewer pool, it's usually male, mid or late career researchers that are selected by journal experts that are our journal's editors, that say, you're an expert in this. And it doesn't take into account the bias that is baked into that relationship that is probably built on, getting a chance to know each other because you've worked in the same field, or maybe at the same institution, or you've known each other for a long time. What it does is that it just continues to re-emphasize this small reviewer pool. And then it turns out that even though these are reviewers that probably are in mid or late stage career and have been doing this for a long time, most haven't really received training on peer review. We want to change that. At Pre-Review, we really imagine a more equitable and broader participation in review. Really, again, the crux of what we're talking about, making things more decentralized and more diverse. What if we could have a world where scholarly outputs, scholarly communication is done openly, rapidly, constructively, and by a diverse global community of peers. Really aligned with a lot of what Fiona talked about from eLife is like, how can we transform this model that hasn't changed much from its original inception of passing papers, through the mail at the beginning of the creation of scholarly communication. Our focus is really around extending the pool of reviewers. And we really want to focus on traditionally marginalized groups of researchers who have often not had the opportunity to be a part of this reviewer pool because they're not considered experts, or they just haven't had the opportunity, or they haven't been able to connect with that journal editor to invite them to review. We want them to be measured by their constructive contributions, community engagement, and really not about seniority and expertise, which really underlies the current model. So what are we doing to achieve that? We're lowering the barriers for participation. We're increasing the number and diversity of reviewers. We're providing training and mentorship, both to existing reviewers and those that have been reviewing for a long time, and those that are just coming out of undergrad or just in grad school and are looking to get tools to do reviews, but through a lens of equity. You want to make sure that these folks are also acknowledged and recognized and have a sense of ownership in this process. And ultimately, we're doing this on the backbone of preprints because it's a way, we believe it's a way to have open, transparent processes and scholarly communications coincide with equitable practices and values. So what are some specific examples? What pre-review really is a community platform for open and preprint review. And it happens through a couple of different products that we offer. So I mentioned we want to train folks across the spectrum of career stage to constructively review preprints. We've talked a lot about some of the barriers and flaws of reviews that ultimately result in a pretty backed up system. But even within that system, there are often reviews that are not constructive and at times probably can be pretty destructive to authors, who receive feedback that is not helpful and that may dissuade them from continuing to be part of the research process. We want to change that. We want to empower reviewers to feel ownership and to use their expertise to review preprints, but to also do it in a very equitable way that is also constructive. We have a platform where any researcher with an ORCID ID can give feedback on a preprint. And I'll go into that a little bit later in like a little more of a step-by-step process. The important point here is that anyone that has an ORCID ID can participate. This does not involve an invitation from a journal editor that that knows you because they met you at a conference or knows you because you went to school together. Anyone can be a part of the review process. We also host these live collaborative reviews where anyone in the world can come to a similar platform to this, like on a Zoom call, and we collaboratively and live review a preprint that has been submitted for review. It's moderated by pre-review staff so that we make sure that it's constructive and timely. And those things put together is really what is the essence of pre-review, with a focus on equity, diversification, and decentralizing. This is our pre-review team. We draw from our experience as researchers, developers, communicators, and reviewers. The leadership team all have PhDs, just meaning that we've been through this process. We've gotten bad reviews or reviews that haven't been constructive. And we wanted to change that system. We wanted to participate and make the system better. You know, we have folks that have been working in the open space for a really long time and want to embed those values into the work that we do. We often talk about who are we reforming for. We really want to talk about who are we reforming with? How are we reforming this system that we know is flawed? In 2023, we've done a lot of work to turn our attention to the community, because that is who should be telling us what this system should look like. We just recently relaunched the pre-review platform, the pre-review reviewer platform. You can pick a DOI from any preprint server, and you pull it into our tool here. So you pop the DOI into our platform. So effectively, we're a preprint server agnostic tool. We also want to give authors choice. I mean, something that a reviewer's choice. That's something that Fiona was talking about as well. We're giving you different options to do the review. We're not just giving you a blank sheet of paper if you need some more structure to help you author that review, to help you participate in this process. We have a process that's more structured, so you'll get prompts like this to give you more additional guidance. Or there's also the option where that blank piece of paper actually has a template that gives you some basic headings for what the review should look like. Or if you've already written the review, you can just copy and paste as well. All pre-reviews get DOIs in the CC BY license, so that, again, we talked about recognition and ownership, so that the reviewers get a citable object. And the CC BY license also means that our reviews can be translated and can be shared in ways that I think probably we haven't quite imagined yet. Finally, we also just recently launched our pre-review clubs. So these are sort of small, self-organized groups around like a common theme, where they get together to review. And so they have their own space on the platform to upload preprints. Again, it's around fostering a sense of community, fostering a sense of ownership and belonging, making this process feel more enjoyable and just more welcoming, because we have a problem not getting enough reviews. And I think this is one of our many responses to how can we get reviewers more engaged in this process. This is just a quick sample of all the partner organizations, or all the organizations that we've partnered with in pre-reviews current and past existence. And if you have questions, ask them today, or if you want to ask them later, you can reach us at community@prereview.org, join our newsletter, and we recently also launched a Slack where we're asking for that community feedback. Again, we really have a user-centered approach in what we are doing at pre-review, because we want to make this model better based on what the community wants.
Thank you very much, Monica. Thank you very much for that. Boris, let's jump right to you. And then following Boris, we'll get to questions. So please get your questions into the Q&A box so that we can have a really fruitful discussion.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and so you can hear me as well. Thanks. Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm going to be talking about the PubPeer website and how it might be useful to editors and to provide some information that maybe you're not aware of. So standard disclaimer, I'm a working academic scientist, but my work for PubPeer is done in my spare time. And any views I may express here or elsewhere representing PubPeer do not necessarily represent those of my employer or host institutions. So there's a survey that I'd like to get people to answer. If you can kind of click, if you get the option, just have you heard of PubPeer before this talk was announced? So I'll carry on and maybe reply to the answers afterwards. So a quick reminder that we're all in the business of creating the scientific record, and it's important. So future research, public policy, medical guidelines build on past research. So unreliable research, if it enters that record, wastes researchers' time, probably severely damages their careers if they try and build on it. It can waste taxpayers' money, private investments, and lead to unethical clinical trials and even dangerous medical guidelines. I mean, ultimately, it could be a question of life and death. Now, unreliable research does get done, and there's a kind of complex ecosystem of reason or systemic reasons why. So authors get quick and easy publications, institutions rise in the ranking, and before this audience, I think I probably need to remind you that some publishers also profit from it. If you don't have to review, you don't have to reject papers, your profit margins probably increase quite nicely. Unfortunately, not all publications are correct, and anybody who's done a PhD will know this. And there are many, many, many causes of research being unreliable, honest error, incompetence, misconduct, you name it. To some extent, to the end user, it doesn't matter that much. So how should it be corrected? Remember, science is self-correcting. Well, the traditional method is to publish another article, but that's very slow, disconnected, not always possible. And as Max Planck said, paraphrased, science advances one funeral at a time. It sort of raises the question, can we do better? Can we correct science more quickly? So this is the modern world. Why not use the internet? And that's actually how PubPeer was born. It was launched by my friend and colleague Brandon Stell about 11 years ago now. Since 2015, it is a US nonprofit foundation. And I think many of you probably understand its mode of operation. It's pretty simple. With a DOI, we can populate a page with metadata for every article. And there's a text box. And if there's something you want to say, you can type it in. It may be moderated before it appears, but when it appears, it'll be immediately available. It's a centralized database available worldwide, as permanent as we can make it, and a strength and controversial point. You can comment anonymously. So there's an example comment shown. Somebody was unhappy about some claim made for the magnetic sense of migrating birds, the Eurasian reed warbler, it turns out. And this was the sort of thing we sort of imagined would appear on the site. But it turned out we got lots and lots and lots of comments pointing to worse things. So here's just the classic example. It's a gel with some pretty hard to explain duplications. And there are a lot of these. And these days, we see quite a lot of this too. I don't know if you heard of tortured phrases investigated by Guillaume Cabernac. There are people who are producing fake papers for the papers themselves and also for the citations they can contain. And to create the fake papers, they use machine translations or synonymizers, and that can give side-splittingly funny set phrases like big data becomes colossal information, a deep neural network becomes a profound neural organization, cloud computing becomes haze figuring, and so on. Signal to noise is not bad as well, yeah, flag to commotion. And these days, it's going to be done with ChatGPT, very hard to detect. And these reports will appear on PubPeer often, and in compensation for the protection of anonymity, which we believe is necessary, PubPeer has developed ever stricter guidelines and moderation procedures. And one point I really want to stress that may not be at all obvious if you visit the site is that PubPeer has a model of pretty exhaustive moderation. So there's an asterisk there of untrusted commenters, which are about half of comments. But our trusted commenters are people like Elizabeth Bick, right? So world experts at what they're doing. And a few points to the guidelines. So the comments need to be scientific, factual, polite, relevant to the article. They need to at least have the appearance of support. So people can be wrong, but they need to have tried. Now, one really important rule is that anything that appears on the site needs to be publicly verifiable. So even if the comment is wrong, a reader must be able then to make up their own mind. And we suggest that everybody read the comments for themselves. There's a higher bar if the comment is implicitly or potentially alleging misconduct. So explicit allegations of misconduct simply are forbidden, partly for legal reasons. But if you point out a duplication of a figure or a potential figure duplication, you're implying misconduct. And such comments must convince our rather expert moderators. And we believe the combination of expert commenters, mostly, and expert moderators means that any such implicit allegation of misconduct is going to be pretty accurate. Now, in theory, the system can be abused, but it's important to realize that it's been running for 11 years and we believe it works in practice. So we're not really interested in criticism of the potential abuse. We'd like to see examples of it having been abused if you want to criticize. So a few statistics. The database contains north of 200,000 user comments on nearly 100,000 papers now. We vary between 500,000 to 1 million views per month. As I said, about 50% of comments are from trusted users and 50 are from untrusted or new users, and they're subject to prior moderation. The protection of anonymity made a huge difference to our comment volume, and we believe people feel the need for that protection, whether it's truly necessary or not. It probably is, but they certainly feel the need. And from a strategic sense, the system works. We've been taken to court 0 times so far. We've been asked for information that we refuse to give about our users. And the model is for our comments to be useful. Okay, we're not interested in volume per se. We're interested in useful comments. And I'd like to point out that, somebody cared about each and every one of those 220,000 comments. So what can publishers do to improve the quality of the research they publish? So this is more my opinion, but I think require full data access at publication. So it encourages high quality reproducible research. It makes fabrication and falsification much more difficult, much riskier. But that only works if it's mandatory at the time of publication, because otherwise it's just a burden on good faith researchers, and bad faith researchers will continue cutting corners. It's a way for journals to crowdsource investigations. You have the data already as well. If you've ever tried to get original data, you'll know how difficult that is. Wouldn't it be nice to have it already? And it would also transform most pub peer discussions. It's sort of happening already. You end up with most issues will be resolved by access to original data. So we just wish it were available. And for the future, I think publishers really need to start knowing who their authors are. The most efficient future strategy for detecting and preventing low quality publications will be to identify verifiably the problem authors. So there's a way of collaborating with PubPeer, which are PubPeer dashboards. This is a subscription service we offer to journals. You can take a free trial. You get alerts about comments. You can access historical commentary. You can respond officially. And I think it's useful scientific feedback for editors. And also our data is being included in a trial by the STM consortium. So you can try things out to some extent there. So I'm going to stop there. I hope I haven't overrun, and be happy to answer questions. So not everybody had heard of PubPeer. Okay, that's shocking. So now you have. So thank you for answering that question.
Great. Well, thank you, Boris. Thank you for that. So now it's discussion time. We have a few questions that have come in, and Boris, I'd actually, since you just spoke about, and we just continue a little bit with some of what you talked about. There was a question around what is your moderation process? Like, what are the things that you're on the lookout for? And in particular, somebody was curious as to how do you determine trustworthiness? Who's trustworthy and who isn't trustworthy?
So we, sorry, my microphone is on. Yes, we don't. So because of anonymity, we have absolutely no way of knowing who is commenting. A few people, so we have trusted users who either sign their comments, so that's the case of Elizabeth Bick, of whom most of you have probably heard, and we have a pseudonym system, so people can retain an identity if they wish, and some of our pseudonymous commenters are clearly expert, and sometimes we know who they are after a long time, and they're also trusted. But otherwise, we have no way of knowing who's commenting, and all we can do is moderate the content of the comment. So as I said, it needs to be scientific, original, no insults, relevant to the article. They need to support an argument. So questions often get refused. You know, if you think there's a problem, show there's a problem, or at least go as far as you can. As I said, things need to be publicly verifiable, and there's a much higher bar if there's that implicit misconduct allegation. So there's trust can be established in the case of people we see repeatedly on the site, either anonymously or not, but otherwise we can't. So we just have to look at the content.
Okay.
So in a nutshell, anybody can comment, but they absolutely can't say anything at all. I mean, they can't, you know, it's very restricted, in fact, what they can say. And if you believe otherwise, try it.
Great. So it's sort of sticking with anonymity. There was a question about you know, there is a challenge in capturing sensitive demographic metadata like gender and language and experience and those sorts of GDPR privacy concerns. So this is, I think, a question really primarily for
Monica.
Fiona.
It was during Monica's talk, yeah, or maybe Fiona as well.
Yeah, for Fiona and Monica to discuss. You know, how do editors are they able to access this data to invite their invite reviewers?
So you know, editors, I mean, we're always trying to improve the process of how editors, you know, invite other reviewers. We can't give them all of this data, obviously, on every reviewer. What we can do is increase the pool of reviewers. We can indicate, you know, that there's a pool of ECR, you know, early career researchers for particular subject areas so that they can choose that. But I think one thing that we do in eLife is study, you know, the sort of biases in review. And we've done quite interesting past studies that show the biases. And so we can train our editors and our reviewers on that and point out to them that, you know, these are creeping in, and you know, you need to be mindful of think of the bias when you're doing these processes. You know, it's not there's no easy fix. You can't just say, you know, here are a group of these kind of reviewers for your paper, you want this kind of diversity, you know, click this box and you'll get them. We can't do that at the moment. Maybe technology will come along and help us with that. But I think, you know, part of it is making sure that people are aware of their unconscious bias, and that's all to do with training the people that are reviewing our research.
Monica, do you have a response to?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to this, you know, the concept of making that review pool bigger, because as it currently stands, the reviewer pool, because so much of it depends on personal connections, or at least sort of like that first invitation for reviews often relies on that personal connection. That is then embedded by the biases in like just of like human culture. And that is going, you're going to associate with people who are like you. And if you are a middle stage career white man, that's probably who you're going to most readily know. Those are just systems of oppression that exist in our everyday lives, and then will, of course, bleed into science. And so the first part is to recognize that that is the system in which we live in, and then think about how can we counter this system that is making it more difficult for the outgroup to participate. And like Fiona said, even just statistically, if you think about it, if you make that reviewer pool bigger and look to encourage underrepresented groups to join that reviewer pool, you're going to statistically just be able to then draw from that pool. So part of the work is not like, we're trying to make it at pre-review, making it easier for editors to have access to a diverse pool by training underrepresented groups. But part of the work also needs to be like to encourage and facilitate these underrepresented groups to come into that reviewer pool. And that's work that we can collaboratively do. So working with editors, working with journals, figuring out how we can make that peer review pool bigger for you. And we do the training. We'll train reviewers so that you feel confident that they have the at least not the subject matter expertise, but at least the expertise to do a review.
So again, related, and there were a couple of questions around this. This idea is of incentivization. How do they get in? How do you incentivize people to do reviews? How do you verify that they are qualified? And is there a reward structure, or is it just so that, or maybe it's to provide experience what around this idea around incentivizing? I think that's a lot of people are curious about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I would love to hear what other people's ideas are, because I think that is the wall that we're all hitting up against, which is why we still have this issue that even though there's these really great programs, and I think as they scale up, it'll make the reviewer scarcity problem better, it's still a big issue. And that's because there is really no incentives to review. And so this is why we're also taking such a community-centered approach, because we want to basically ask folks, what would make it more likely that you're going to do this thing that really isn't incentivized? It's one item maybe on your CV, but it's pretty low on your CV and isn't going to make or break whether you get a job or not. So what could it be in it for you? And I think one of the things that we've been thinking about is making this process and being part of pre-review, for example, feel like a community, or feel like you've got more of a sense of belonging, or feel that sense of ownership, that I'm getting something out of not really contributing to the scientific process, but also in a way that where I'm feeling heard, where I'm feeling like I'm meeting other like-minded individuals, and that I am getting some recognition, even though we don't have a reward system. We have, we mint DOIs for each of the reviews, so you can put that, on your on different sort of record keeping platforms, including your CV. But continuing to ask those questions, because we know right now there's no incentive for you to do this. So what is what can we do to make it easier for you? And in terms of we don't do vetting. That's we're turning that question on its head. We're saying that if you're going to come to our platform and spend your time to try to make a paper better, we don't care. We want to give you the training to do a review well, but we're going to say yes to you coming in with your time and give you the opportunity to help make this paper better. We have a code of conduct that is applied. So, if there's issues of foul language or poor language or not a constructive review, that will get pulled. But we're recognizing that if people want to spend the time to do this, we want to make it easy for them. We don't want to turn them away because we think everyone can be an expert.
Fiona, do you
Yeah.
have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, reviews should really become, you know, what the ideal situation is it becomes a real integral part of research culture. And I think there's really, you know, a lot of interesting developments, a lot of different innovations around that. With TheLife, where we also have a platform called Society, and it brings together, you know, different groups of researchers that are looking to work together to, you know, review preprints, and they come in there and they comment on different preprints. But what's really attractive to them is that they're part of this community, and essentially is, you know, this thing that journals always did. You know, people came together because it was a coalescing of their community around a particular area. But now that there's preprints there, then people are very interested in actually improving their own research fields. So it's in their interest to come together with other people in their research fields to do this in a kind of collaborative manner. And I think that's really interesting. And I think there'll be lots of developments of different communities coming together to do that, you know, in a public way, because in essence, technology and research culture is moving forward. And so there's all these different other outlets for that to happen. Obviously, you know, if it's kind of going to embed, then it should become part of research assessment. So a contribution to, you know, a researcher's what they collect publications, they collect peer reviews, you know, it should become part of that. But I think that's, you know, a big wish that might not be fulfilled. So you've got to think of other ways, and being part of a community that are doing something together is a real incentive for most scientists.
Boris, is there a post-publication perspective on this?
Good question. So there's I'd say PubPeer has participated in the creation of a worldwide community of, to a large extent, self-made experts in the forensic examination of publications. So if you think of people like Elizabeth Bick or you know, people that are half outsiders, but nonetheless, I mean, Elizabeth certainly is, I claim, is more expert than, you know, most editors or institutional integrity officers. I mean, she's certainly studied more papers anyway. So, so there's certainly a community developing there. Otherwise, because of the anonymity, it's a bit difficult for us to create a community on the site. There are, you know, if there's a really high profile paper then that is being discussed, then you do sometimes, I mean, in the best of cases, you will have, you know, multiple world experts giving their considered opinion on a paper, and that does happen sometimes. And, you know, that's usually pretty definitive then, because even compared to normal peer review where you have, you know, 3 plausible but, you know, somewhat random available people who are giving a review in a short time. So post-publication peer review can take its time. You know, the reviewers can self-select, which has good and bad aspects, but, you know, sometimes one person has spotted the problem in a paper and, you know, you had no chance of knowing who it was when you were reviewing it. I actually had a question for Fiona, if I'm allowed to,
Of course.
to ask that. So I'm just interested if there's been a case, I think not yet from when we spoke, of somebody choosing to create a version of record under the new system of a paper that, you know, you would have rejected clearly. And has that happened? And what would happen if it hasn't happened, but, you know, what will happen when it does?
So, you know, obviously we only launched a model at the end of February, so the papers are moving through the process. So
Sure.
there's a lot of papers that have had, well, I mean, I think the comment which we would have rejected before, I think the point, what we're trying to do here is review the paper. We're not looking at it in terms of an accept reject decision. We're reviewing what the paper looks like in itself. So in essence, there's a lot of papers that have had, you know, I suppose what you would call inadequate or incomplete in their assessment. They're moving through the process. A lot of authors are revising them. So to be honest, our system hasn't been running long enough for those to complete all the way to the version of record at this point in time. So that, you know, come back to us in 6 months and we'll say what happened, you know, to those papers. Did those authors revise them to the extent that, you know, they're moved in terms of different terminology, or have they now published as versions of records? But we're too early in the process that that's not happened as yet.
Okay, well, actually, maybe I should modify slightly the question. What happens if somebody wants to create a version of record with a paper that should be retracted?
Should be retracted. We have policy for retractions, and our retractions still stand the way that we
and that would happen even before the version of record then?
Yes, that's correct. So we have a policy around that is the same as the existing eLife policy. So anything that should be retracted, and we would ask the authors to then contact the preprint server and ask for that paper to be withdrawn. So I think there's a difference about saying something needs more work done to it than a retraction, which is an entirely different matter altogether.
So we're almost out of time. There are a couple of interesting questions that would take a lot longer in terms of response. There was a question around rigor and ethics and reproducibility. How do we strike a balance between inclusivity and the burden of the reviewer time to look at things like data and images? I think that's a little hard to answer, but that same, I mean, it's a little hard to answer in the short amount of time we have, but there was another question from the same attendee about addressing conflicts of interest with pre and post publication reviews. Does anybody have a quick answer for a practical answer around conflict of interest? How do you ensure?
Just quickly, we do have a checkbox when you use our platform about a conflict of interest. There's a statement that you have to read and then agree to it. Boris?
So we don't. So the anonymity makes that impossible for us. So you have to judge a comment on its content, not on who's making it, except in the rare cases where it's signed.
Okay. Good. Well, I'm sorry that I didn't get to all of the questions. If you had your name in the question, we will try to get back to you. But otherwise, we are out of time. I want to thank the panelists, and I want to thank the attendees. All of you make this series successful, and it's great that so many of the people who register show up. And I think that's a large credit goes to the presenters and the great stuff that they're talking about in the webinar. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Boris. Thanks, Monica. Thanks, Fiona. And thanks, Kushal, who you can't see in that little darkened square, for helping me put this together. And everybody enjoy Peer Review Week. Bye-bye.